Great, thank you so much, Shannon. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our 9th Fireside Chat on Research Transitions. I'm Fiona Horsfall. I'm the Director of the Office of Research Transition and Application in OAR. And one of our roles is to provide transition support with the objective of accelerating transitions across NOAA and simplifying the transition process in general. The goal of our series of Fireside Chats on Research Transitions is to provide participants with a broader understanding of research and development at NOAA. I want to thank my staff for putting this event together. The goal of this particular Fireside Chat will be to review examples of recently finalized transition plans from across the NOAA line offices. Panelists will discuss their experiences identifying the need for a transition plan, developing the transition plan, and acquiring the appropriate input and clearances. Speakers will also discuss the variety of transition types, including which transition plan templates are applicable under different scenarios. This session will be moderated by Dr. Gary Matlock, the OAR Deputy Assistant Administrator for Science. And we will start with remarks from Cisco Werner, Director of Scientific Programs and Chief Science Advisor for the National Marine Fisheries Service, and follow with a conversation from our panelists for an in-depth look into the diversity of transition plans that scientists from across NOAA have been working on. We are hoping that these real-world examples will provide some key insights for other scientists and program managers at NOAA who are thinking about writing a transition plan or currently are in the process of writing a transition plan, and also offer some general takeaways for research transition planning at NOAA. We encourage you to ask questions through the chat box, as Shannon mentioned. They will be sent directly to Shannon from the NOAA, who's working with the NOAA library, to pose to the panelists in the second half of the event. If there's not enough time to answer all the questions, we will look to getting the questions answered directly via email after the session. And just a quick note, plug for us, on our website, the ORTA website, we have a feedback form. We're collecting information on transition support in general, including a question on these fireside chats to see how we can better serve our audiences. So I'd appreciate it if you could go in there and respond to that. So now it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Cisco Werner. Dr. Werner is the Director of, as I mentioned, the Director of Scientific Programs and the Chief Science Advisor for NOAA Fisheries, a role he took on in June 2017. In this capacity, he leads NOAA Fisheries' efforts to provide the science needed to support sustainable fisheries and ecosystems and to continue our nation's progress in ending overfishing, rebuilding fish populations, saving critical species, and preserving vital habitats. As Director, Cisco supervises the planning, development, and management of a multidisciplinary scientific enterprise of basic and applied research. He oversees NOAA's 6 regional fisheries science centers, including 24 labs and field stations, and the Office of Science and Technology. Cisco previously served as the Science and Research Director for NOAA's Southwest Fisheries Science Center from 2011 to 2016. His research has focused on the development and implementation of numerical models of ocean circulation and ocean forecasting systems. He also has published extensively on the effects of physical forcing on marine ecosystems and the impact on the structure, function, and abundance of ecologically and commercially important species in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Cisco earned his Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and his Master's and PhD in Oceanography, all from the University of Washington. So welcome, Cisco, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fiona, and good afternoon and good morning for those further out west, and thanks for the opportunity to speak on this topic of transition plans. Before jumping into the topic of transition plans itself, I thought I'd say a little bit about why these are important to us, particularly in fisheries. So a little bit about what we do in fisheries and why transition plans are important to us. So like Fiona said, what we do is obviously assess the health of our marine ecosystems in terms of the population, the abundance, the distribution. And for the longest time, we've been doing this with methods that have been pretty stable in terms of we go out to sea, we use acoustics, we use nets, and a host of other technologies that have been pretty stable over the last few decades and have been very successful. We've actually been quite successful in how we manage our fisheries, the recovery of the populations, et cetera. But over the past few years, everything has changed. Whether the oceans themselves have changed in terms of, how, the natural systems are evolving, whether it's in response to climate, for example, in response to differences in biogeochemistry. And so therefore that affects a number of things about the species that we look at. We're no longer looking at things that are average with some fluctuations about them, but we're actually looking at things that are changing, they're trending. And that means that we have to look at things in a different way. We have to sample things in a different way. We have to analyze things in a different way. In addition, they're distributed over much broader areas. So we have to be more nimble. We have to basically change a lot of the things that we're doing. And this, of course, those of us who, everybody, probably most people here, you're careful about how you do your experiment, you're careful about how you conduct your measurements, et cetera. As soon as you start changing a lot of things, you begin to say, how much am I affecting, the actual observations and the actual conclusions that I'm getting, and how do I make sure that I'm actually measuring what I want to measure, so that I can provide the advice that's needed. We also have this aspect within fisheries that we have to provide advice to the communities that depend on it. These are the fishermen. These are the what we call the fishery management councils, that are the decision-making bodies. So there's also a pretty quick transition of science to information to management that we have to do, which again is based on the data that we collect. And so given all these changes that are happening, given that we have to continue to provide advice and perhaps in a different way, we're changing a lot of the ways that we collect information. We're changing a lot of the ways that we collect data. We're using uncrewed systems in addition to ships. We are measuring not just things with acoustics, but we're measuring them with molecular approaches. We're analyzing not just using old methods that we used to do, but we bring in artificial intelligence, machine learning. We're using optical systems in areas that we don't want to disturb, that are areas that we want to make sure that we protect say the coral reefs or anything like that. We don't want to put nets down there. So there's a host of technologies that we're bringing in that require that we know that while they work in a research mode, as we transition them to operations, and we have to transition all of these methods to operations because we need to measure things differently to be able to continue to provide the information that we provide, you need naturally a plan. How am I going to do this? What all is involved in evolving something that is in research in terms of how I use a camera to actually then going from there and quantifying what's there, identifying what's there, and ultimately translating it into information. So in fisheries, we're faced probably now with at least 6 really exciting methods that we're trying to develop. I mentioned some of them: optical systems, uncrewed systems, molecular approaches, et cetera, that we have to transition from a research mode, proof of concept, yes, we can take the measurements, to actually can we run operationally with them. And so that then says, well, we need to think this through. We need to think this through for a number of reasons. And that's where the transition plan comes in. And I'm going to take the liberty of actually, and you can imagine you have an idea as a researcher, hey, I still need to provide this information. And so what is a transition plan? A transition plan then is, I'm going to write out what I think I need to measure, because I'm going to meet a goal, which is provide information. That's one way to start thinking about it, right? I need to continue to provide information, but I'm going to use a different approach to provide that information. Or you can imagine starting from the other direction. Somebody says, I need information, and the way that you're providing it is not helping me. So you can imagine being approached as a researcher and saying, hey, I need you to measure something differently because the way that you're doing it is having some effects or some impacts on some other aspect of the system that we would prefer you didn't. So it's something, a transition plan is perhaps a conversation that can be either initiated by the researcher or it can be initiated by somebody who will be the recipient of the researcher. But then everything in between is just that. How do you actually make it work? How do you actually make that transition? And I'm going to read actually, you know, what comes with, when I receive transition plans to sign off on. There's a paragraph that I think captures it very nicely in terms of, here's a transition plan, you know, please review and sign. And then it says, and I'm going to read verbatim. It says, please remember a transition plan is intended to provide the vision or roadmap for the proposed capability and guide transition efforts towards research to operations, applications, commercializations, or other uses. So it's a proposal. You're thinking that you've got an idea that you want to make you have a research idea that somebody is either invited for you to develop, or you have a research idea that you want to propose to develop. It also recognizes that it's a living document. It says it's a living document to be amended with increasing detail as the project matures and will remain valid as long as the corresponding development project is completely successful, satisfies end user defined line office metrics, et cetera, et cetera. So it's also said, hey, this isn't the final word. Just because you wrote a plan, it doesn't mean you're done. It's like anything, you know, you iterate on it. The end user needs might change, or you discovered something while you were doing research that you want to do differently. Well, that's fine. That's okay. A transition plan allows you to adjust from either end in terms of how that transition plan works. And then the final one, for those of us who, you know, perhaps are now sort of in an administrative role, it says the signing of such a transition plan provides situational awareness of the work and review/acknowledgement to move forward and does not represent a binding agreement and or funding availability. And this is important because, you know, it also allows you to plan. It recognizes that, you know, in order to do these things, there is going to have to be some thinking about how much it's going to cost, how do I invest resources in the short term and in the long term. And the resource investment can be in the straight technology thing, but if you're thinking longer term, you know, if I'm going to operationalize, do I need to bring in, it allows you to plan for, do I need to bring in or prepare a different workforce? How do I actually do this? How do I, you know, really, you know, think both in the short term and long term of what it is it would be to do a transition plan, but it says it's not binding. It depends on whether, you know, the funding is there and so on, but it does give you that that sense or that opportunity to plan. And so, you know, then the email ends, future updates are made as required. So that's kind of what appears in you know, and really nicely captures what the transition plans are, and how one should think about them. It's an opportunity to write down and think about how you're going to develop these ideas, not in isolation, with an end user in mind, with somebody else who you will be collaborating, which might be even a third party. I'll bring up an example. You know, one of the things that we're doing, one of the recent plans that I signed off on had to do with using uncrewed systems, in this case, you know, hexacopters, or, you know, these little flying things, drone-like things that were going to go beyond the visual line of sight. So they were going to go further away than what you can see them. Well, that's tricky, right? I mean, it's good because you're going to go somewhere where perhaps you wouldn't be able to fly an airplane or something, but you can't see it, so there might be some other thing that you need to worry about. Well, that's where, you know, perhaps talking to the FAA might come in terms of how you do it. So as you think about what you want to do, it's not just what you want to do in the end user, but you'd also make sure that you consider more broadly, you know, other groups that need to be involved in the decision making, other groups that might invest, other groups that might help. So it's really it's sort of a natural way of thinking through how you need to, all the different components that you need to develop, you know, as you try to take that research to operations, research to applications, research to commercialization in a systematic way. And the important thing is that it's not a one and done. You can iterate on it, and eventually, you know, hopefully at the end of it, something really good comes out of it. So for us, we're at a point where transition plans are going to be our bread and butter in many ways in terms of how we think through as we evolve how we do our fisheries. And I think I'm probably not speaking just for fisheries. I'm sure every line office is going through this opportunity of advanced technologies and such. And transition plans also allow these cross-line office discussions and such. So I think I'll stop there. I think I covered the main points that I wanted to say. It's not a very hard thing to do. These are, you know, the transition plans I've seen are maybe, I don't know, maybe 15 to 20 pages long. And you can imagine just talking about it and being excited about what you do. It's not an onerous thing. It's something that one does, and it helps you on your way to success. So with that, I'll stop, and Fiona, I think I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Cisco, for those remarks, and also for actually giving ORTA a plug, because all those templates that we have with that language are in fact on our website and available for anybody to use. So I really appreciate your insightful remarks. Thank you. I'm now very pleased to introduce Dr. Gary Matlock, who will moderate the panel discussion, and you can see our panelists here on the screen. Gary is our OAR Deputy Assistant Administrator for Science, and he's responsible for guiding and evaluating NOAA's research and development portfolio. I want to point out that Gary was in fact the person who created ORTA, and it was through his vision for helping to accelerate transitions across NOAA that ORTA was established. So just a quick note about Gary. Prior to arriving at OAR, he spent 18 years working in 3 other line offices, directing ecological and fisheries-related research and overseeing the agency's national and international fisheries management programs. So Gary began his career with his federal career with the National Marine Fisheries Service in 1992 as the Director of Field Operations in the Southwest region. In 1994, he became the Program Management Officer for Fisheries in Silver Spring. And in 2000, he became the Director of the National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science in the National Ocean Service. And throughout his career, he has successfully led efforts to base fisheries management decisions on scientific information instead of political whim or personal opinions. This goal has taken him to all levels of the judicial system as an expert witness on behalf of science and fisheries management decisions, including to the US Supreme Court. Gary received a US Department of Commerce Gold Medal in 1996, the Vice President's Hammer Award in 1998, and a second gold medal in 2000. Quick note about Gary is that he earned his PhD in wildlife and fisheries sciences at Texas A&M University. So with that, Gary, please take it away.
Thank you, Fiona, very much. And Cisco, thank you for the really supportive and explanatory notions around the idea of transition plans. Also want to thank all the folks that organized this chat today. Really, really well done. For those of us participating in it, we received a lot of very clear directions, instruction, and support on what we're supposed to do today, and we'll do our best to continue what's already been established by Fiona and Cisco and the others. So it's my pleasure to address a topic that has been around in NOAA for about 15 years, the topic of a transition plan, which conceptually is the notion of bringing those who are doing R&D together as early as possible with those that might use, apply, commercialize, or otherwise use the R&D that is being generated. Fundamentally, if in the R&D arena, there is no notion, no idea of transitioning that R&D into an application, then you don't need a transition plan. But if the R&D is being sold as something that might be used by someone for the benefit of society, speeding a model up, for example, then a transition plan is a tool. It's not designed, as Cisco said, to be an obstacle or a burden. It's designed to be a tool to bring the two elements, the R&D components and the applicators, together as early as possible to be addressing the need identified by either one and how the R&D might meet that need. So we have 5 distinguished scientists today with us to address this topic further using their own experiences In addition to answering a couple of questions that I'll offer to them, we want to give you, the audience, to ask questions of them once the introductory remarks are finished. So we have 5 people from across NOAA. They represent 3 different line offices, and they include Hyun-Sook Kim from the Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorological Laboratory in Miami, Matt Grossi from the Fisheries Service in the Southeast Fisheries Science Center, Andrea Vander Woude from the Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Patrick Marsh from the National Weather Service, and Alice Crawford from the Air Resources Lab in College Park, Maryland. We'd like to begin then with a question to each of you. You'll have about 3 minutes or so to respond, and then we'll have a second question to follow up. The question is, can you please provide a brief overview of the R&D project that included the use of a transition plan, including what was the motivation for you to develop that plan? And we'll start with you, Hyun-Sook.
Thank you. Thank you for our invitation. And then I am a physical oceanographer working on the developing Earth system modeling, and especially for the hurricane intensity forecast. So the project that I of particular interest in this particular chat is called Uncrewed, the observation of the upper ocean surface and the near surface atmospheric for improved tropical cyclone intensity predictions, led by teams from AOML and the PMEL, with the receiving line offices at the EMC, and it is funded and supported by the ORTA and the AOML. So the motivation of this project is, as I mentioned, that we are working on an Earth system model. That means its coupling is very important, especially in the TC hurricane environmental conditions. In the air-sea interaction process, pretty crucial to simulate or predict intensity changes. So, until now, there is no specific there's no observations for us to better understanding of the air-sea interaction process. And this project will provide some kind of observations. We can advance the understanding of air simulations, and then eventually we can improve the TC forecasts.
All right, thank you very much. Matt, the same question for you. Brief overview of the project and what was the motivation for the plan?
Sure, thanks also for the invite, appreciate it. The project that I was part of is called the CDAR Stock Assessments with a Modern and Efficient Life History Data Repository. Essentially, we are looking to develop a web-based data repository that'll be used for compiling and processing and exporting field data that we collect during our annual stock assessment. So for those who may not be familiar, all of the fishery science centers around the country participate in regular, usually annual, stock assessment surveys, and those help us responsibly regulate species that are of commercial and or recreational importance. So the surveys are response to, among other mandates, the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act, and the scientific information that we collate every year is used to inform those high stakes decisions like habitat preservation, catch quotas, where fishing is allowed or prohibited. So here in the Southeast, we participate annually in several species assessments as part of what's called the Southeast Data Assessment and Review Program, or CDAR. And that is a cooperative process involving a number of state and local and academic partners, all working together to gather species-specific data such as fish length, age, and histological information. So this project is intended to streamline and also automate as much as possible the process by which those partners report their data to us and make it available to us. It's currently a rather cumbersome process that has evolved over the years and is in need of modernization. Our motivation for writing the transition plan might be unique on this panel today, I'm not sure, but we wrote it to actually accompany the funding proposal for the project. In our case, the request for proposals required an abbreviated transition plan, so it contained a few questions that we had to answer. But after talking to Ken Vieira and the Orta folks, we decided to go all out, if you will, and write a full transition plan with letters of support and leadership signatures to help show that we really thought this project out and that we're serious about it.
All right, Matt, thanks very much. Andrea, same question. Overview of the project and motivation for the plan.
Great, thank you, Gary, and thanks again also for the invitation. Our transition plan is titled, give me just a minute, NOAA's Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory Uncrewed Aircraft Systems Initiative for Harmful Algal Bloom Detection. And the motivation behind our transition plan was to take our crewed aircraft flights that are monitoring cyanobacteria in the western basin of Lake Erie and move those towards uncrewed systems. And we're primarily developing those systems for drinking water managers in the Great Lakes. So as many of you know, within the Great Lakes, we draw our water directly from the Great Lakes, and that water can be impacted by harmful algal blooms and needs to be treated for toxins during the harmful algal bloom season. The part of our transition plan was to move our hyperspectral camera, which we've put in a crewed aircraft for the past 8 years now, into an uncrewed system, and to help develop that technology to directly support the nearshore drinking water intakes. And the piece and motivation for this was to provide a really rapid response in addition to the harmful algal bloom that is put out on regular frequency, but an even more rapid response during the harmful algal bloom season to those toxins that can be prevalent in the Great Lakes.
All right, thank you very much. Patrick, I have you up next. Same question, overview and motivation.
Sure, thank you everyone for inviting me today. Our project was titled Generating Calibrated Forecast Guidance for Severe Weather Beyond Day One. And essentially what this project was, it was a collaboration through the Joint Technology Transfer Initiative through OAR's Weather Program Office with Colorado State University. And the idea was to take operational NOAA NWS global forecast models that are of such resolution that you do not explicitly predict severe thunderstorms and their associated hazards in the model itself. You use covariates to come up with calibrated guidance that way. So this approach used machine learning. I believe it was a random forest approach to calibrating these forecasts, or generating these forecasts and then calibrating them of severe thunderstorm occurrence from days 2 through day 8, which is what the Storm Prediction Center is part of our mission. We go out from day 1 out to day 8. And so part of the motivation for writing the transition plan, one, if I'm going to be direct, is it's a requirement as part of the JTTI initiative. But more broadly is this is a collaboration between NOAA and an academic institution, and we're not co-located. And so essentially what the transition plan allowed us to do is the quality of the transition plan, as we've found, is highly correlated to the quality of the collaboration. And so the transition plan allowed us to lay out what the expectations were, how we would move things from Colorado State, if it met objectives, over to NOAA and implement it. And in fact, I'm happy to say that this will actually complete transition to operations, hopefully sometime later this calendar year. as we are in the process of onboarding this new technique and approach onto the Weather Services supercomputer.
Super, thank you very much. And then Alice, same question, overview and motivation.
Right, so the transition plan that I'll be focusing on was using high-split ensemble dispersion modeling for forecasting applications. And this transition plan was for a project to produce ensemble forecasts for events such as hazardous releases of a chemical release or volcanic emission into the atmosphere. And this would support the volcanic ash advisory centers at NOAA, as well as weather forecasting offices who provide support in the case of like emergency response to things like refinery fires or trail derailments, and enable them to have probabilistic forecasts for these events.
I think we just lost your
oh, can you hear me now? Is that better? I don't know why it.
That's good. We got you.
Okay. How much did you hear?
All the way up, I think, to about the last 5 words.
Oh, okay. So this, like the previous speaker, this was funded by a JTTI proposal that we wrote for transition to operations. The proposal was a collaboration between us and the Environmental Modeling Center, EMC, and then that required a transition plan, which was new for us. We had done transitions with EMC before, but we had not done, well, not that I know of. I shouldn't say that. I've only, this was the first transition plan I think those of us on the project had written. So that was the main impetus for doing it. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. For those of you who might not know, JTTI stands for the Joint Technology Transfer Initiative, I think. It's something that OAR gets money for and is designed specifically to move R&D into RL9, into operations ultimately. And so one of the requirements for JTTI funding is that a transition plan be submitted either with the proposal or shortly thereafter. So it's a mechanism by which the requirement for doing transition plans actually comes along with the carrot, the money, to be able to enable that. All right, next question, and if I may for this one, start with you, Patrick. It is, what was the process like for you in doing a transition plan? What kind of timeline, what kind of obstacles, and what kind of tricks did you find or learn about that were useful to help you get through the process?
Sure, that's a great question, and I'll start by saying probably the greatest trick is to do transition plans. This is not my first, we're at the Storm Prediction Center. We probably have more than 24 transition plans over the last 5 to 6 years, mostly funded through various WPO, Weather Programs Office, funding mechanisms in which transition plans are required. And so having done them quite a bit, that actually helps us quite a bit in knowing how to structure them. And so what we've kind of settled on is you can't just expect one person to do the transition plan. This is one of those, as I mentioned previously, the quality of the transition plan is a reflection of the quality of the collaboration. The more collaborative and involved everybody is in the research, the more input they have into the transition plan, the better both the transition plan and the research end up being. And so probably the best piece of advice I could have is everybody should have a seat at the table in the research, and everybody should have a seat at the table in writing the transition plan. Otherwise, you get disconnect, and the research will go off one way, and those working on the transition plan may think something else. And so it's a good document to describe what and set expectations of what you think the research will be and how you think it's going to fit into operations at a later date. And so that's probably the biggest thing that we've learned through doing dozens of these is that everybody needs to be involved. You can't just have one person go off and say, you go write the transition plan, I'm going to go do the research. It needs to be collaborative, just like the research.
Super, really great answer. Thank you so much. Let's see, how about Andrea? Let's do the same question. What was the process like? what kind of timeline, obstacles, and any tricks that you might have identified that helped you get through it.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. The process took a couple years for us, and the first thing that happened was that ORTA actually reached out to us and said, this is a really great opportunity as you move into the uncrewed world for you to start thinking about a transition plan and having that. It's a frequent requirement within our lab requirements as well to make sure that we have a transition plan in the works, and any of our proposals that we submit, we have to outline when the transition plan will be formulated right from the beginning. And Ken Vieira was the primary person that helped us along the pathway and helped us draft the transition plan. And I really like how Patrick mentioned it's a collaborative effort. It definitely was in our case as well. The engineer that works with me, Laura Marshall, wrote a good portion of the transition plan and helped me draft the language. And along with ORTA, they provide excellent support, and that's a key part in these transition plans. I think maybe all of us can agree that ORTA has done a fabulous job in providing the support needed to push us across that finish line. And each part of that transition plan, especially, I would pull out the part where you have to outline the different gates to meet in order to proceed to the next part of the transition plan.
Thank you very much. Very, very insightful in my opinion. Let's see, Matt, how about you? Same question. Timeline, process, tricks of the trade that you learned, and any other kind of information you'd like to add.
Yeah, so when we started writing our transition plan, the proposal that it was accompanying had already been written, other than the transition plan section of it, and with a few other parts that needed to be beefed up. So we were able to use the material from the main sections of the proposal to start writing the transition plan. Material like the research background or the description of current capabilities, the budget, to name a few. We did have to write some new content though, like the transition activities and the acceptance for transition. We needed a more detailed implementation strategy and expected operational outcomes, a list of end users. But all of that new material actually helped us improve our proposal at the same time. In our case, since we were up against the proposal submission deadline, our timeline was pretty tight once we decided that we were going to write a full transition plan. From our initial meeting with ORTA to receiving our final signature, it took almost exactly 1 month. I was looking back at the dates. I think our writing process for the transition plan itself took about 2 weeks, which was really facilitated by having the proposal already written. Because like I said, we were able to borrow a considerable amount of material. And then it took another week or so to gather the 6 letters of support and the 7 signatures that went along with it. So, writing a transition plan can be done in as little as 2 weeks, as we demonstrated. But I will emphasize that it was still a lot of work to pull that off. We worked almost exclusively on that document during that 2-week window. And by we, I mean, it was a team effort, a team of us working together in the Google Doc, crowdsourced writing. It seems to be a common theme here. And so I'm here representing that team effort that I played a part in. But really the meat and potatoes of the transition plan was written by our biology and life history branch scientists who eat, breathe, and sleep CDAR data. So a particular shout out to Tracy McCulloch, who put tons of time and effort into writing the content. As far as the review process, once we had given our first attempt at writing the plan, and I should point out that this was the first transition plan that any of us had actually written ourselves. So once we had that first draft, we shared it with Ken Vieira, and he guided us to the finish line with tremendous patience, I would say, because we had a lot of work to do in a short period of time. And he also handled all of our signatures for us and managed to even get Dr. Werner's signature before before we had to submit our proposal. So thank you, Dr. Werner, for that. And we cannot say enough about how helpful Ken was during that process. Another theme, it seems, today, and we really are grateful for that.
Super, thanks very much. And not to overlook Alice Yu or Hyun-Sook. Alice, would you like to add anything to this topic?
Sure, I'll just say, yes, for us too, we took a lot of stuff from the proposal forward into the transition plan. So getting the initial draft out was not bad. But it did take us a couple of years to get all the signatures. And a lot of that was conversations around what was the actual scope of the project and getting the details of that nailed down, which was helpful in retrospect to have to go through those conversations.
Super, thank you. Hyun-Sook?
Yeah, my project, which is a sail-drone operation, and then we've been, locally, collect all the observations and last 3 seasons, especially this season. But the mother of nature is sort of cooperating, so we are able to collect some observations under the Hurricane Cat 4. But the instrument itself has been failed, especially under the major hurricane wind conditions. So that's a kind of a sad part. But this plan includes 2 parts. It's a part of an R2O umbrella plan. 1A goes with collecting observations, and then provide all the observations to research scientists, as well as send the data into the real time into GTS, so that the operation centers that can use for data simulation for atmospheric parts with the med ops, and then ocean side for ocean ops. So receiving center in the EMC is working with us, and during that process, Annette Hellingston at the AOML, she is a transition manager, really works so hard, and then she's pushing us to update this transition plan every single time, every single season, every single day, month. So we strongly owe to her, in addition to Ken from ORTA, also help us to moving this plan to more positive way, and then with the support from the ORTA as well. So I don't complain. It's a smooth transition for now.
Thank you very much. I think I saw, Patrick, you were sort of jumping out of your chair to add something else. So let me give you the opportunity to do that.
Yes, thank you. So one thing that listening to the other speakers reminded me that I should have said is the transition plan shouldn't be thought of as a static document. It's a living document. And if you want to have a good transition plan, some of these projects are multi-years in the making. And so what you think may happen at the beginning is not what ends up at the end. So be updating the document and treat it as a living document as you go through. That's probably another best practice that we've learned.
Gary, you're on mute.
Then I would make, given that we have 5 people who have actually been through this process, some more than once, is that the notion of transition plans is a new concept to NOAA. It's in its infancy in reality, and the evolution that we're going through in using the documents and the tool as intended is, from my perspective at least, very, very, very satisfying to hear from 5 people who have been exposed to this task, viewed by many as that, just a task, and to hear that it has provided some benefit, even though it may take a long time in some instances, but it provides that benefit of the interaction among the people doing R&D and the people who might be applying it as early as possible, in order to get the benefit of that collective thinking about, if the R&D is successful, how is it going to be applied? What needs to be done now in order to make it successful in the application? So I am very grateful to all of you for being here and expressing your thoughts and your experiences. It's just terrific from my perspective. So with that, Katie, let me turn it over to you to see if we have questions from the audience. Katie?
We're actually going to pass it to Shannon. Shannon, you've been collecting the questions, correct?
Yes, I have, and we do have one really great question here. And I will go ahead and get started. Just before I read it out, just a quick reminder to everyone attending today. If you have any questions or comments, just pop those into the questions box on your control panel, and we will get to them. So the first question that we have is a two-part question. It's open to everyone, so I'd encourage anyone who wants to contribute to this to jump in. So this question says, how do you know when you are ready for developing a transition plan? And at what stage in the technical readiness level framework should a transition plan be considered?
Andrea?
Sure. I'll answer that quickly and then I'll turn it over to Patrick. So I forgot to mention during the previous question that we had gone back and forth on our transition plan for a good 2 years and maybe 3 years at this point before some of the templates were created. And since that time period, those templates have really established early on that you can start it right at the beginning of your project, as Matt was and Alice were also saying, that you can start as early as possible because it is a work in progress, and the new templates have the addition of a table at the top to track the changes and the revisions that are made over time. And I don't know, from my perspective, each meeting I'm in lately covers or asks the question, what is the societal impact? And when you're thinking about an operational entity, it answers that question early on for our projects to be able to directly look at the societal impact. In the case of, the harmful algal bloom work is not only the stakeholders in the region, but is also the drinking water managers that are looking at our imagery for cyanobacteria levels, and then also looking at other measurements per toxicity. But it really helps answer the societal impact question that we've been posed multiple times. Turn it over to Patrick.
So my advice to that, or how I would answer that question, is very similar. As soon as possible. If you think that what your project or work is going to be doing will be sustained and transition to operations, whatever that may be, at some point in the future, it never hurts to start thinking about how that might look now. Excuse me, because that may influence decisions you make as to how you plan out or scope the body of work. For example, if you want this to be something that's sustained as part of operations, you may choose instrument package X rather than instrument package Y that's cost prohibitive in the long run. So having these conversations. Now, whether that means you write out a formal transition plan using a template, I will leave that to others to discuss, but the components of the transition plan should be incorporated into your thinking as soon as possible.
Can I add to that as well? Sorry, really good answers. And also from the standpoint, like you were saying, on the planning side, for those, as we think about how the long-term evolution and needs are or impacts of the transition to operations are known, it also allows us, perhaps at a higher level, if you will, to start planning in terms of how this impacts other things that we're doing. So I think starting the transition plan early really allows a really broad end-to-end discussion and planning of how do we prepare for for the new product to be operationalized and all of that, how to communicate it, and making sure that we communicate it with all the people that we need to talk to, particularly if we're close to to decision making on something. So I think the answer was right in that as soon as possible, because it really does then flag it for everybody to start working with the idea, and perhaps even start seeking funding for it and support as needed.
Hyun?
Yes, in this sense, our project is very fortunate, if I may say, because when I look at this transition plan, we started from April last year, and then the latest one is just April or June 2023. But in the meantime, what make it happen is that I think all third parties, including funding agencies, as well, in one place to plan out, from the beginning to end, and then what is a need from the collecting observations, or not even collecting observations, field campaign, and then contracting safe drone, and then how to design the sampling, then how to transition observation data to GTS. I mean, transmitting the data to GTS, and where the EMCs get involved in, because the EMC has to have a sort of an interface, to download the data from the GTS. So without that conversation, EMC might be totally left out, not knowing, there is observations, met observations coming from the safe drone. So we have the conversation from the beginning, and then pretty much ironed out what pipeline should be. And most importantly, as I said, this is R2O project, and this is operation, transition to operation in weather service. So that means, we are having a cross-line offices transition plan, and then like other proposals that Patrick and Alice were talking about, the vehicle they are using it JTTI, but our this proposal is going through the bridge program that ORTA offers, which is tremendous help, because we cannot providing and then receiving offices are not totally non-communication at all. So through the bridging program, they speed up the transition plan pretty well. So we are having data being assimilated into GDAS, atmospheric model NWS at the EMC at the level of 5. So we are moving along, and then quite optimistic. Toward the end of the program, it will be RL6.
So that's a good segue for a question that comes to mind as you were talking. And by the way, I have to leave for another meeting at 3 o'clock Eastern time today. So between Fiona and Shannon, I'm sure they can take over the interaction with the audience. My question for you all is, how did you, if you did, incorporate the evolution of readiness levels into the transition planning? Is it something that's identified in the plans, or not at all, or put in there sort of just to be compliant with, I got readiness levels addressed, or in any other fashion? So anybody who'd like to begin with an answer to that one, that would be great. Alice.
Yeah, so it's in the plan, and the JTTI, if you're part of a JTTI proposal, I almost think of the JTTI being part of that kind of project. It's almost like living a transition plan. It's pretty organized. They have regular meetings. You give regular updates. You have milestones, and you're supposed to and you indicate what your risks are, how you mitigate them. So I almost feel like being part of that is like being part of a living transition plan. So I will say that when we did our first transition plan document, we really didn't update that document on a regular basis because we did it pretty early, and I don't think it was really socialized that we were supposed to do that, but we were kind of doing it in a way through all the JTTI reports and stuff that were supposed to be submitted, because those would have any revisions to the project schedule and so forth in there. So yes, the readiness levels were definitely part of that. I personally find the readiness levels to be pretty helpful, actually, when I'm talking about projects and trying to communicate where they are. And I mean, they're not always like a hard and fast rule, right? And there's some subjective interpretation, but I think everyone in NOAA, like if you say like RL4, or if you say RL2, or if you say RL8, like it's kind of a good shorthand to communicate like where you think you are with it, right? Now, if you say RL9, everyone like gives you a big smile and you feel like you should buy a cake and all of that stuff. So yeah, I think the readiness levels are used quite a bit.
All right, anyone else? Matt.
So if I remember correctly, there's a question in the template now. It's for like a two-part question. It's like starting with what is the readiness level of your project as it stands, and then the second part of that is when it's in operation, like when it's at RL9, what would that look like? So for us, having started off at the very beginning, I found that to be a very helpful way of kind of road mapping what we were setting out to do, because our proposal that had already been pretty much written had presented a methodology, like here's what we want to do, here's how we're going to accomplish it, but it hadn't put it in that framework. And when we were writing the transition plan, it made us stop and realize, well, okay, like this database that we're proposing is not just coming out of the blue. I mean, we kind of already have a prototype from another project that was funded, and so maybe we're not starting at RL1. And then it allowed us in our methodology, in our timeline, to put these kind of benchmarks, like, all right, after we accomplish this part of the development, we'll be at RL6. In order to get to RL7, we'll have to prove this, and so forth, and all the way down to the end. And I think my team would agree that framing the proposal in that way made it a lot stronger, because it kind of gave it some context and really made sure we crossed the T's and dotted the I's from a research and development point of view.
Super, thank you so much. Andrea, I think, did I see your hand up, and then Patrick?
Yeah, just quickly, I don't even know if I raised a hand, but just quickly, I was looking back into our transition plan, and we have an implementation strategy below listing how we'll accomplish going through each one of the gates that are required, as I said before, within the transition plan. And within that implementation strategy, very similar to what was just said, we have a clear outline of we'll, reach these milestones at this time and be at this readiness level at this time. But as we were writing this with Canberra, it was emphasized multiple times that this is a vision. So, I mentioned that it took a good 2 to 3 years for us to work with the drinking water managers as well as other collaborators on how to transition this into operations and what it would look like. So the piece that we struggled with was whether or not we would still run it operationally, or if the drinking water managers could be taught how to fly the uncrewed aircraft. And just really quickly, we have very well documented readiness levels that I agree are very helpful overall as a common language throughout NOAA.
Super. Thank you very much, Patrick. And gosh, I hate to leave, but I have another meeting I just got to go to. So Patrick, and then Fiona, I'll leave it in your hands.
So thanks. Just real quickly, it's it's a different perspective here at the Storm Prediction Center, because we are an operational unit, and so we have the ability to set what RL9 looks like when we work through a transition plan, because we actually can be responsible for transitioning it to operations. So it allows us to work with whoever we're collaborating with to actually say, hey, these are the expectations that we have to get to the final, to cross the hurdle over into before we will be able to take it and transition it to operations. So just a different perspective.
Great, thank you for that, Patrick. I do want to go back to Shannon now to see if we have any more questions from the audience.
Yes, we have a fantastic question that just came in. And this is, I think, directed to anyone. So if anyone would like to jump in, feel free. This question says, In what way have you seen the most benefit from the use of a transition plan? Does it come from ease of implementation, budget, timing, all of these, or something different?
Okay, Patrick, why don't you tackle that one first?
So there are benefits across all of it. From a budgetary perspective, at least when you're thinking about the final steps of transitioning to operations, having a transition plan and thinking through it allows you to start to make the case to budget officials as to this is what the cost is, this is what we need to move forward with it, and it helps with the planning purposes of that. And so that there's a big cost or a big help there. But I mean, it's also, I mean, there's some accountability. It's basically a way, if you think, at least with the way we operate it here through the JTTI, where we're dealing with external partners, in a lot of ways, it's kind of like I don't want to say it's a contract because it's not that rigid, but it's an agreement that you will do this, and when you meet that, we will do that, and we will take it from there. And so there's some accountability associated with this document and setting the expectations in writing. And so that's right where I go back to what I previously said about the strength of the collaboration is really reflected in the document. The stronger collaboration you have, you're going to end up with a stronger transition plan.
Great, Alice?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of what Pat was saying, but communication, basically. I think everything that's hard about transitions is about communication. And besides the transition plan, I'll just mention that Environmental Modeling Center, who we work with a lot on the transitions, they also have documents that really help. They have like a quad chart, which is used for kind of long-term planning, and we found very useful just to make sure we're on the same page of kind of like the long-term goals and short-term goals too. And then they also have a project plan, which is somewhat similar to a transition plan, but provides a lot of details about what actually happens during the transition and when and what meetings happen and what exactly steps have to occur. Because the communication can just be really hard because you have like different groups with like kind of different cultures and different assumptions about things. So I just find that when I first started working with these other groups, you know, you just like not understand the context that things are being said in or what the background was. And these documents, I think, they don't completely alleviate that, but they do help.
So I agree with you. I think that especially looking at the templates, it has kind of like a requirement for engagement and collaboration, and also for people to see what, if they don't talk to you, they can read the transition plan and they can still understand what their expectations are and what your expectations of them are. So anybody else want to say anything about that? Andrea, I saw your hand first.
Yeah, and my answer is really quick. For us, the main factor was the cost-benefit analysis and the charts that have to be filled out in regards to that. We really had to verify how our crewed flights and how much they cost per hour, the man and people and women power that are attributed to those efforts compared to us going on the ground with the uncrewed aircraft systems, and which ended up being way, way cheaper compared to the per hourly rate to have a crewed flight. So that was the main factor for us that really drove home the need for a transition plan.
Great, thank you. Matt?
I agree with everything that's been said already. And one other thing that I would say is, for us, one of the advantages has been the letters of support that went along with the transition plan. It's not something that our team thought about doing for the proposal itself. And some people will get letters of support for proposals. We just didn't think of that for this particular call for proposals. We did it for the transition plan. The reviewers really appreciated that, apparently, we found out. But the reason that was so good for us is because it engaged, I mean, this kind of echoes what's already been said, but it engaged our end users, our stakeholders, before we even set out. Otherwise, we would risk hopefully getting the money, building something, and then tossing it over the fence and say, here, use this. And they may or may not meet the needs that, our end users they know we need a better approach, but if we didn't include them in that planning process, they may not have gotten something that addressed their needs. And so this way, it gave us an opportunity to bring them in from the beginning and keep them engaged throughout, so that we avoid that unhappy scenario at the end.
That's a great point, Matt, is that getting end users is what we all say, but when you have an external person or an external group, we can't really have them sign an internal document like a NOAA transition plan. So having the letters of support is really critical, and so appreciate that. So I want to move it to Hyun-Sook now, who had her hand up too.
Yes, having the transition plan, brings us everybody or participants on one, goals. So, it's a document we can talk about, we have our working directions toward that particular accomplishing particular object, goals. So it is nice to have one. In the meantime, during the, finishing up the project, I've noticed that having briefing at the regular base is better than writing submitting a progress report. So for example, I have a project funded from JTTI, and then the other one is this one through the bridge project. And JTTI, we have to submit an annual report in the written documents. It's a little bit time consuming, all right? So, and on the other hand, this bridging project, just 1 hour, we can give updates to everybody. We are on the same page. So, I see advantage on this briefing over the written report. Certainly, we can submit the annual report, but quarterly report, the semi-annual report, that this is a little bit time consuming.
Yeah, a great point. In fact, we found that the update briefings are really productive because people do tend to ask questions, and we've seen some cases where there have been a few surprises come out as well. So we're kind of running up against time, so I want to ask Shannon if there's another question from the audience.
So we have just one more question if everyone would like to close this out really quickly. We'd just like to know what's the current status of your project, and has the R&D progressed to a new readiness level after writing your transition plan?
So who wants to take that on first?
Okay, I'll go first. And then, as I said earlier, we have R2O transition umbrella plan, A and B. A is this collecting data and then transmission data to GTS. That is RL5. And the second one is data to airwaves 2. So that the receiving part is the NHC, Hurricane National Centers, so that they can see the observations collecting in real time, where the observations are in respect to TC. So that is RL7 currently.
Great, thanks. And Matt? I'm just going around in circles around my screen, so Matt?
Yeah, so I can happily say now, as of 2 days ago, we found out that our proposal was funded. So I guess that was a success story. We really think that the transition plan played a role in that for the reasons that I've already said. We're looking forward to getting started, probably hopefully in the spring or summer, whenever the funds arrive. But
great, thank you. Andrea?
Yes, quickly, I was looking back at our transition plan. So we're at a readiness level 6 and moving to a readiness level 7 this spring with initial flights for 2 different types of uncrewed aircraft systems.
Great, thank you. Alice?
Yes, I'll happily report that transition plan was successfully transitioned last December to RL9. I'm not sure, like it was a really it was a really big accomplishment for everyone involved. It involved a lot of people. And we are currently working on another round of TTI funding for another project and have a transition plan written that's waiting for signatures. And so we look forward to many more years of this process.
Great, thank you. Patrick?
Ours is also in the process of being transitioned to RL9. It's, I guess, 8.5, if you will, because it's running in development mode on the supercomputers, just waiting for implementation slots to open up, which will happen later this year. So.
Great, thank you. So I just want to say that I never intended for this Fireside Chat to be an infomercial for ORTA, and in particular for Ken Vieira. I'm sure Ken is delighted that everybody's been invoking his name. He has been a great help, and he's really been instrumental in implementing the templates and things like that. But I also want to thank the rest of my team that have been working on the development of these templates. We have an assortment of templates. If anybody's interested on the website, it's very much dependent on your project. And of course, ORTA is there to help. And like I said, we're not an infomercial for this, but I hope that everybody's found these examples helpful, and that everybody can see that it's not a nightmare. I do want to point out one thing, Alice. You mentioned that it took about 2 to 3 years to get your transition plan signed. We've really been working to accelerate that process to get them signed very, very quickly. And again, Ken likes to annoy people a lot and ping them and make sure that they're getting them signed. And I'm sure that Cisco, you've been seeing a lot of that things going through your office as well. So I want to thank everybody. I want to offer to Cisco any closing words. You're on mute.
Thought I unmuted. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the opportunity, and also it was great to catch up with all of these, all of the efforts that are going on. And Matt, we got to meet up sometime. But anyone else, thanks so much. And it is it's a natural process when you think about it in terms of how to do it. And so I'm really glad that it's as developed and you know, healthy as it is. So thank you so much.